This is Jared, AC7WH Backyard Ham Radio, and I'm going to be running a series of tests for the cross antenna. So this should be pretty interesting, at least for me, and I hope it's interesting and informative for many of you as well. So let's take a bit of a closer look. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take my video right here. So with this, you'll see the typical cross antenna frame that I've been using, thanks to Kevin and Bailey. And this is the 17-meter quarter wavelength wire, but I have it in basically a 3/4 loop. So it starts there, comes around here, and then stops right in there, being fed by this 1-to-1 current un that can handle up to 1500 watts peak envelope power, or PEP. And I also have two 17-meter quarter wavelength radials. Okay, so with that, I'm going to take a look at how this works with the tuning. Because with this being trimmed for a quarter wavelength on 17 meters, it should be just about right with very little tuning for the 17-meter band, but it should be on the long side for 6 meters, 10 meters, 12 meters, 15 meters, but on the short side for 20 and 40 and 80 meters. Now that's beside it being on the short side for the 30-meter band, which I don't typically use, and the 60-meter band, which I also typically don't use, but I'm thankful that we have those available if someone wants to use them. But in any case, I'm going to step inside and we're going to run some tuning and see how easily it tunes up with each of the different bands. I might not do much on 160 meters because this would be very short for that band, but we shall see. All right. Be back shortly. All right, here I am back in the ham shack. You can see my face reflected over here in the Palstar HF-AUTO tuner, so that's kind of fun. But let's go ahead and power that on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move this to standby because I'm curious what sort of, or bypass here. Standby will be over to my right on the LA1K amplifier. But as far as the HF-AUTO, let's take a look at what sort of tuning we're going to get here. This is at 18.139 megahertz, so right in the middle of where I'm trying to use the 17-meter band. And with the tuner on bypass, let's go ahead and take a look here and a bit of a listen. All right, I've got this on 15 watts on my radio there. You can just see that up here on the screen, but I'm focusing primarily on the tuner here because I want to see how this tunes up. So again, on bypass mode there, let's see how this does. 15 watts, upper sideband. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? Over. Okay, so we're looking at a 3.18 to 1. Now there is so much metal, wire, and all of that around in that deck, like I've spoken of multiple times before on my videos. So it's not just going to be a straight up easy quarter wavelength, no tune necessary type of situation. So let's go ahead and see what happens if I try to tune up. This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel tuning. A lot of people don't realize that whenever you tune, if you are transmitting a signal other than like some microwatts like you would with an antenna analyzer or something like that, you are supposed to identify yourself. Don't just tune up without an identification. That is illegal according to the FCC rules as far as I understand them. Okay, let's go ahead now that I have announced that, and I'm going to switch this to RTTY so that I can do some easy tuning here. All right, here goes. On auto. Very quickly tuned up. Not too bad. Okay, so the range for the capacitor on the HF-AUTO is as low as 47 and as high as 196. And for the inductor, it's going to be as low as 140 and as high as 560. So it didn't take a ton of tuning. In fact, as you saw before, with no tuning whatsoever, it was a little over a 3-to-1. And so the internal tuner in my Yaesu up there would be able to tune that to a reasonable SWR even without the HF-AUTO. So that's pretty decent, I would say, for just a strung up wire like that. But now let's see how easy it is to tune on some other frequencies. So I'm going to go ahead and move on up. Let's take this off of RTTY. Put it back on USB upper sideband. And we're going to go ahead and switch over to the 6-meter band. So that's 52 megahertz. Shouldn't really be anything going on this one, but I'll listen for a moment. Seems good. All right, let's go ahead and give this a shot. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? Over. Yeah, I didn't think so. This is AC7WH tuning. So it's starting to tune already, just like it is, probably because of its memory in the HF-AUTO, but I'm actually going to go in here and I'm going to go to RTTY and I'm going to give it some power and see if it'll tune up. Not bad, a 1.08 to 1. So that is needing a significant amount of capacitance and inductance in this particular case. Now you can tune this differently and still get a really good result, but that's interesting to see. Okay, let's go ahead and move over to the 10-meter band. I'm going to switch back to upper sideband for a moment. Go to the 10-meter band at 29 megahertz. I'm still holding at 15 watts of power. All right, let's go ahead and try this. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? Over. Now if I was doing high power, I would listen longer. I would try saying, is the frequency in use more times before transmitting, but I'm just doing 15 watts just to tune up. All right, here we go. This is AC7WH tuning. All right, switching over to RTTY. The reason I'm doing that is because that will trigger the tuner more easily than single sideband. You can hear some noises in there because it is a mechanical device. At least I can hear them. I don't have the microphone right near the tuner. Notice how with this high SWR, the Yaesu is only putting out about 8 watts there, now 9. So the capacitor and inductor inside the HF-AUTO tuner are adjusting, trying to get a good SWR. The inductor, the L was adjusting, then the C for capacitor. All right, not the most perfect tune in the world, but it's a 1.32 to 1. Not bad. My LA1K amplifier is also registering a 1.3 to 1, so very, very good. And it's not taking that much capacitance or inductance. The lower the L reading or inductance, the better, because inductors, from what I understand, tend to waste a certain amount of energy as heat, whereas capacitors waste very little energy because they are more voltage based, whereas inductors are more current based and store the energy in an electric field for capacitors, magnetic field for inductors. Okay, I'd love to talk about that more in the future. For now, I'm switching back to upper sideband. Let's go ahead and try the 12 meter band. So I'm going to try 24,960. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel, tuning. Okay, I'm going to switch it back to radio teletype or RTTY so that the tuner will recognize the signal more easily, especially at this low power. And let's go ahead and try tuning up. Okay, that is registering a 1.36 to 1. Interestingly, the Palstar LA1K amplifier is registering a 1.6 to 1 instead of a 1.36. Now I could fine tune this here if I put it into manual mode, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to try to get roughly a 1.5 to 1 SWR if I can get that quickly. There's multiple modes. There's manual mode, there's slow mode, there's fast mode, and so forth within the tuning here, and I'm just doing the fast automatic one for now. Okay, going back to upper sideband. So far the 17 meter quarter wavelength antenna wire in a 3/4 loop is working just fine with that cross antenna frame, and I'm able to tune up with it. And so let's go ahead and try the next one here. This will be 15 meters. So we're going to go ahead and try 21.325 megahertz. 21.325. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? This is AC7WH tuning. All right, moving to RTTY again, and let's tune. Incidentally, on my side, it's showing 21.325.700 on the Yaesu transceiver screen. That's partly because I have the RTTY upper mode, so it's not really going to be fully centered per se right on the .32500. Anyway, technicality, but that's part of the reason why you'll see 21.326 here, even though I had mentioned 21.325 earlier. So this is really doing some hunting here. Not too bad. Let's see what this comes to. It's thinking. Evidently the way that that is resonating is going to be a little bit tricky for it to tune. With those 17-meter quarter wavelength radials and driven elements. So that's 1.8 to 1 right there. So in fully automatic mode, it wasn't quite able to tune on the 15-meter band. So I'm not going to take time to manually do it, but I know I'd be able to easily get a better reading if I manually tuned it. I could do one little step or two at a time, and I could fine tune that. So even then, a 1.8 to 1 isn't terrible. Although I will say on my amplifier, it's registering a 2.3 to 1. So each thing can be calibrated slightly differently, but also the way that the power is reflected and registers within the different devices, all of that can be taken into account to get the best possible idea of how well this is tuned. But in any case, let's go ahead and go to the next one, which is 20-meter band, so 14.250. I'm going to switch this back to upper sideband. And let's go to 14.250. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? This is AC7WH tuning. Okay, it's trying to automatically go to that spot there. I'm going to go ahead and tell it through holding down the power for a moment on RTTY. I'm going to tell it to try to tune. We'll see what it can do here. Whoop, it's going down some. It's trying though. We'll see what happens. All right, let's see. This one may also be difficult for it to tune. Oh, it's doing something. The nice thing is, once you store something in memory, as long as you're using the same antenna setup and so forth, you can come back to that very quickly. So again, here I could adjust this if I wanted to manually, and I've been able to find that in most cases I can get a decent tune. See, it has a certain programming in here that wants to go through a certain process, and it wants to have like a certain range here in these values, and then it tries to go off of those. And until it learns what the best value is, it may be completely in left field when it needs to be over in right field, for example, if that makes sense, using a baseball analogy. So what I think is when it started to dip down there, it should have stopped adjusting the inductor on the right and started adjusting the capacitor on the left. But see, now it's at a spot where that's not going to help. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this on my manual mode here. Let's see. So we're going to go to manual. It's got the capacitor adjusted there. Let's try this. Okay, that's not really helping much. Okay, now let's move to the inductor. See if we can get that to show a lower rating. Interesting. I wish I would have memorized where it was here, where it was showing that slightly lower rating. Whoop, is that it? That's it. 711, 667, 5C, that's better. It should have kept doing that in the programming, in my opinion. Okay, so now that that's at like 513, oh, 491 even. Let's go to the capacitor, and let's try adjusting that, see if we can trim that down some more. Oop, 513, 491, 470, 451. Yep, see, you just have to get into the right spot. I'm down into the 3s now. Look at that. Yeah, see, just the way that the programming was, it was not quite going where I needed it to. So right in there, I'm basically tuned, like a 1.5 to 1. Okay, let's fine tune the inductor now. Look at that. See, so just don't give up because you don't get a tune immediately. Look at that. Now, there's many videos out there that'll show you that a perfect, so to speak, 1.0 to 1 is not necessary. I think most of you know that already. But just for demonstration's sake, I just want to show you how close I can get here. There, 1.0 to 1. And if I wanted to memorize that, I would just do this. And it says settings change. So I held down the transmit, and then I held down this red button. All right, sounds like I'm just off frequency for someone there, so I don't want to be interfering with anybody, even though I am only at 16 watts. Kind of sounds like data. All right, well, I'm not going to transmit anymore there. Let's go ahead and go to the next one down now that I've got that one tuned up. So it's, by the way, a 164 on capacitance, 174 on inductance. So not quite to the max of 196 or so for the capacitor. And nicely low near the bottom portion of the inductor, which would be 140 out of a range of 140 to 560. Again, the capacitor goes 47 to 196 or so, according to my tests previously. So with that, this is leaning heavily on the capacitor, which is fine. That won't rob a lot of energy from what I've studied. And the inductor, it's being really light with, which is good because the more inductance, the more energy you can end up losing through heat and so forth, because it's a coil and so forth that can lose heat. That would have been RF energy. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. So I'm going to try 40 meter band, so 7.213. Okay, we are now on upper sideband. I want lower sideband here. 7.213. There we go. All right, let's see what we got. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? Over. I'm going to switch this back to auto mode. Almost forgot. There we go. This is AC7WH, testing and tuning. We're going to go to RTTY lower. Let's see. I wonder if it'll tune okay on 40 meters with a quarter wavelength trim for 17 meters. So this would be less than an eighth of a wavelength, but let's see what we can do here. One thing I like about loop antennas is you can get some different types of resonances, I believe, because you have the diameter, which is one size, and then you've got the circumference or perimeter, depending on the shape, which is another size, and so forth, another length, if you will. Okay, well, that's saying that I can't tune it. It's at a 2.40. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. But I am curious if very quickly I can adjust it with manual mode. Let's just see. Okay, I saw a 2.39 for a moment. And it can fluctuate some. But let's see if we can get some of this in here. 3.8, 3.3, okay. 3.2. Let's see if we can get this down. 2.2, huh? Not bad. 219, 208. I'm almost in the ones. So I saw 203 there. 197, 196, 198. Oh, look at that. 189, 187, 183. 178, oh, 177. As you can see, this takes patience. 173, 169. That's just about usable right there. 159, ooh, nice. I saw 54. I saw 55 and 54, 50. 1.49 to 1. That's decent. I'm going to see if I can tune it a little bit more. 1.43. 42. 439. I might take that. Let's see. 1.33 to 1 on my LA1K. It's saying 1.5 to 1, but pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and save this one. So, tuned up on 40 meters. How about that? Okay, let's go back to lower sideband. And the last thing I think I'm going to do is 80. I might just test it very briefly on 160 just for fun and demonstration purposes, and then we'll end this video because it's almost half an hour already. Okay, for the 80 meter band, I'll go to 3.80. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Tuning. All right, going to RTTY again. Whoop, I'm on bypass. We're going to go to auto. Well, it's doing something, obviously. I know I had said originally that I was not going to do manual tuning here, but it's so easy, a little bit time consuming, but easy to do as long as it is something you can tune, that it was worth trying. Wow, this is just about automatically, wow. It automatically tuned for the 80 meter band. Must just be the way the resonance is working with that quarter wavelength for 17 meters. Not bad. About a 1.6, or on the LA1K it's registering a 1.7 to 1. Not bad at all. 80 meters with a wire trimmed for a quarter wavelength on 17. That's doable, especially since I can fine tune it if I wanted to with the manual tuning. It is leaning more heavily on the inductance. Go figure, it needed more of that, but still that's by no means maxed out, which would be around 560. This is a little over 360. It is using a fair amount of capacitance as well, so there's a lot of reactance and so forth going on with this antenna from what I can tell. And for fun, let's try the 160 meter band. We'll try 1.93. Is the frequency in use? Is the frequency in use? This is Alpha Charlie 7 Whiskey Hotel. Is the frequency in use? This is AC7WH tuning. Again, I would give much more time for listening if I was not using low power, and especially if I was using a prime band, so to speak, but this is 160 meters. It's broad daylight out here, so it's not a time when this should be interfering with someone. But still, I wanted to follow protocol. I'm not perfect by any means, but at least I try. All right, let's go back to radio teletype or RTTY, and let's give that a shot. Let's just see what happens. I'd be surprised if it tunes automatically, but we're going to find out. Whoa. 1.12 to 1. It's registering as a 1.2 to 1 on my amplifier. I would still advise being careful with this if you ever do this or something similar, because now you'll notice, go figure, it's really relying heavily on that inductor, almost maxed out. It's at a 560. The capacitor is also close to the maxed out position at 162. So again, capacitor goes up to roughly 196, inductor goes up to roughly 560, so you can see it's pretty close to the top there. But it is tunable. I would just say be careful, listen for any signs of arcing, be aware of how your antenna is doing, and be aware that this is going to be very inefficient. But you can tune on all of these different bands with a simple antenna, simple design like I showed you, and that's pretty exciting. All right, let's go ahead and power off. There's my amplifier over there. I was using that mostly as a reference point because it was just in standby mode. But there's that antenna. All right, I'm hoping to try that out soon. This is AC7WH 73.